Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Katz, and welcome to Tuesday's edition of WeAreSC.com's Inside the Trojan Huddle, where we tell it like it is. Friends, Inside the Trojans Huddle is a game-like panel discussion that is posted Tuesdays in the off-season, twice during the regular season. The huddle features WeAreSC columnists, staff writers, and historians. We first start out with the pregame show, where we introduce our panel members for this edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle. And then we give you the latest USC Trojans football news. Now let's meet Tuesday's panelists. A WeAreSC columnist who writes WeAreSC.com's The Monday Morass, Yay or Nay, and Sunday Takeaways, in addition to regular season football and basketball reports. He also hosts his own podcast show entitled Locked On USC. That's Marc Kulkin. The editor-in-chief of WeAreSC.com, columnist, national recruiting guru, and a graduate of USC, Erik McKinney, and a former William Jewell College defensive back and WeAreSC columnist who writes the popular WeAreSC.com column Musings with Arledge, and he has his own weekly WeAreSC.com video show, Musings with Arledge, and is a graduate of the USC Law School. That's Chris Arledge. And a weekly WeAreSC columnist who writes Fridays, the Obvious, Not So Obvious, IMHO Sunday, and is an active member of the Football Writers Association of America, your moderator and producer of Inside the Trojans Huddle, Greg Katz. Before we kick off this Tuesday's edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle, here's the latest USC football news. This Saturday marks the opening of USC's 15 days of spring practice on Howard Jones, Brian Kennedy Fields. In competition will conclude with the open to the public spring game on Saturday, April 15th in the Coliseum. Leading the Trojans offensively in the spring will be returning Heisman Trophy winning quarterback Caleb Williams and an impressive group of returning and transfer skill players. Trojans will, however, be looking to retool their offensive line. And all eyes, however, will be on the defense and whether some heralded transfer linemen and linebackers can turn this side of the ball around from its dismal 2022 performance. Having looked at the offense last week, today's huddle panel will make their post-spring defensive depth chart projections, including starters, momentarily. And in coaching news, according to On3, former USC offensive lineman Biani Talimayavu is expected to be hired at the new Stanford offensive line coach for Troy Taylor's new Cardinal staff. Biani had recently been hired at Northern Arizona after serving as an Oregon graduate assistant last season. Friends, WeAreSC Inside the Trojans Huddle greatly appreciates your viewer and listenership, and we encourage those of you watching on the site, like this on YouTube, to click on the red subscriber and like buttons. Greatly valued, and it is free. And a reminder, WeAreSC.com is offering a subscription special. You can get all the WeAreSC premium content for just $29.99 up to August 31st, 2023, or $9.99 per month. All right, let's get to the first half kickoff. And the second half as well is going to take us to the defensive post-practice predictions, analysis, evaluations, perspective from our defensive group here today. And as we said last week, it's expected that the media will have limited access to view spring practice sessions. I've asked our panelists to predict their expectations, analysis, starters for both spring defensive depth chart for each position group. Of note, predictions for each defensive position unit will be based only by those players expected to participate in spring ball, but panelists can reference those players that will not be participating due to various circumstances. So, panel, enough of me. Let's first begin with the Trojans defensive line group. Give me your post-spring depth chart and thoughts on this unit. And remember, again, we're only talking about those players that are expected to fully participate in spring ball, although you may reference players that do not participate in spring practice. So with that, let's begin, as we always do, with our leadoff hitter, Marc Kulkin. Who is your down defensive lineman?
Hello. Well, there's so much to choose from. I mean, they had to bring in some guys. I'm going to stick with what I did on my show last week. I'm going to go Tyrone Taleni and Kion Bars as the two guys starting with their hands in the dirt. Behind them, and again, we know that during the spring, they'd like to do a lot of cross training at the defensive end, rush in. So for the time being, out of spring, I've got the backups as Jack Sullivan and Dejon Benton. And I'm even going to put Stanley Taofo in there with the or factor. And then depth, you've got Jamar Sakona, Earl Barquette. Is Colin Mobley going to be on the roster coming out of spring? He came back from the portal. And then let's see. Oh, what about Sullivan Tuliapupu? Is he going to go from rush inside? I mean, if you see him now, he's pretty big. He doesn't look like a rush in, like he's in a stand-up guy. He looks hand in the dirt. So as far as starters, backups, depth, there you go.
All right, Erik McKinney, agree, disagree? What do you got?
Yeah, I think this is a spot where you can shake it up in a number of different ways. And I think that's really good for USC. I mean, we'll see what it looks like actually in the fall and what that production is. But it seemed for a while now like USC couldn't have its pick between 6, 7, 8 guys. You had to play these 3 guys because they were kind of your only options. The 3 guys down across the front, I'm going to say coming out of spring, I think the new guy that jumps in there is Anthony Lucas. And I think part of that is projecting a little bit. And also when you bring in kind of your big name, again, Anthony Lucas is not what Caleb Williams was last year, but I think Anthony Lucas is one of the biggest names in terms of who he was as a recruit and what kind of impact that makes when you get a guy like that. Having him take a starting spot at the end of spring is a positive for you. So I think him in that Thule spot out of defensive end, I know he's a big guy. I'm interested to see if he can play some inside and do some different things. And then I think 2 returners hang on to their starting spots. I like Stanley Taofo in the middle and Tyrone Taleni. I think those 2 guys, what Thule gave you last year, the way coaches and players raved about his work ethic and energy and effort and all of that, I think those 2 guys as returners do enough there to keep them as starters coming out of spring. I think Jack Sullivan and Keon Bars are 2 guys that are right behind that group. And if those guys end up as starters coming out of spring, I don't think any of us are surprised. I want to see where Devin Tompkins lands. He's my sort of question of how much has he progressed after that freshman year. Is he out at rush end? Does he play defensive end? Has he grown to a point where he's a tackle and moves inside a little bit? He's kind of a wild card, I think, for me, and a guy where you saw glimpses a little bit last year of there could be something with this guy. And I don't think it's a mistake that Lincoln Riley specifically pointed to him as a guy that they really like during the offseason coming into the spring.
All right. Well, fresh from Spain, probably doing some scouting work of high school potential blue chippers and transfers. Chris, welcome back. Your thoughts on the defensive line?
Yeah, I was actually doing the WeAreSC World Tour. You wouldn't believe how big the Inside the Trojans Huddle show is in Spain. I mean, it's sort of like, remember when Hasselhoff was a giant star in Germany, but in his home country, nobody thought it made sense that he was even singing? It's kind of like that. Here, nobody cares about us, but in Spain, we're huge. Huge.
Oh, by the way, Chris, shameless plug for you. Great shows you've had. Who's going to be your next interview guest? Do you know yet?
Yeah, Mark Carrier this week, actually.
Cool.
True Trojan legend. So that'll be fun.
Cool.
I'm going to see if I can get him to tell me that he was a better safety than Troy Polamalu. I don't know if he's going to do it, but I'm going to push.
Let's get ready to rumble.
Yeah. Okay. So Kyan Bars is going to be one of the starters. He's the only really big body that's proven, I think, on the roster up there, and they're undersized. So I think he's gonna get one of the 3 spots. I think Jack Sullivan is gonna be a starter. He's also, I've seen people that have Sullivan and Anthony Lucas both at rush in. I don't think that makes any sense at all. Jack is a big dude. I think he's more of a hand in the dirt kind of guy. And I think that, and I think he's going to start. He's more proven than just about anybody else on the roster at this point. The third spot, I don't know. I think Anthony Lucas is a real possibility, but I'm going to go Tyrone Tyleni, because I think that he played pretty well last year, a lot better than we expected. And I would expect from a guy who hasn't played a lot of football, I think we're going to see a big jump from him. And while Anthony Lucas may be the most talented guy up front on the roster, he didn't do anything last year, and he's still a young guy. So I don't know what we're going to see from him. So I'm going Bars, Tyleni, Sullivan. I think Lucas and Stanley Tofu both play quite a bit. I think Anthony Lucas has a possibility to be a superstar. And I would also say that I could see Solomon T. I could see him getting some time if he is in fact bigger than he was. I think that's the right spot for him. I don't think he has the speed at this point to really be a rush end. And I could see Sam Green by the time you get to the middle or late in the season, especially in passing situations. I could see him getting some time. I really like his explosiveness, and I think that he's a promising pass rusher. But he's not going to start. So that's my down group.
All right, well, I'll finish off this segment. I think the starters will be Anthony Lucas, who I think is going to be under a lot of scrutiny because a lot was made out of him coming out of high school. Question marks on is he in every down? Does he bring it every down? Well, this is going to be his chance to do it. But on the surface of it, I'll say Anthony Lucas. I believe that Kyron Bars will be there. The fact of the matter is he's been on the precipice of really pushing to be a first team all Pac-12 player. He was second team a couple of seasons ago. And I am also going to go along with Tyrone Tyleni. I think he's come leaps and bounds. Backups, I think the wild card to the starting group for me is Jack Sullivan. I think that he could probably move it in. Listening to him talk and seeing film on him, he's going to bring it every single down, especially against the rush. If he can pick up on the pass attack to sack, he can move right in there. I do like Stanley Taufu. Dejon Benton, I think, will be in the mix. I think another wild card, personally, is what they do with Tuya Pupu. I think he's gotten bigger, obviously. I think that he brings it every down. He loves the game. And, if you're looking for difference makers, he's going to be in there. Another one I'm kind of interested in is Earl Barquette Jr. Just what is he going to be doing? I think he has to lay down the gauntlet on this one to show that he's a part of it. I think Sam Green is interesting. I don't think he'll be quite ready, but maybe later in the season we'll be surprised, and you never know what happens with injuries. So with that, let's move on to the edge rusher competition. Mark, who starts?
I was just going to ask Eric a real quick question because he's a numbers guy. How often do they play that dime compared to their 3-3?
Hello.
When the linebackers got hurt, they went dime a ton starting kind of halfway through the year and doing that. But that didn't really affect that front four. That was just pulling one of the inside linebackers off and sticking another safety out there.
Right.
So that it'll be interesting to see what they do there. They were comfortable there. I think you have more linebackers that you trust this year, where hopefully you don't have to go to that quite as much.
Cool.
Mark, you want to finish up there on this segment for you?
Yeah, we're moving to rush end, right?
Yeah, we're dealing with the edge rusher.
Yeah. I have a really soft spot. I want to.
Wait a minute, can you write that down? Mark actually has a soft spot. Okay, just wanted to get that in there.
So,
on your skull, Mark, where's the soft spot?
I dropped my head a few times. Yes,
Okay.
I do. And that's probably going to make sense when I say that. I want to say Corey Foreman is going to be the starter coming out of spring camp. I know he's not going to be the starter coming out of spring camp. but I'd like to see him succeed. So I don't know if he can't do it this year as a starter. I don't know if he's willing to accept everybody who's coming across. So maybe that's where I'm coming from. I think when you look at his numbers, throughout this is going to be his third year, and so far he's got 24 total tackles. And on he didn't even record a statistic in the Cotton Bowl. I looked that up today. I was shocked to find that out. So the backups, if Anthony Lucas is probably going to be the starter, they brought him here to be on the field. Whether he's a rush in, whether he's a defensive end, I don't know. Jack Sullivan can move him up on the line, and then behind those guys, just go Romello Height. Where's Solomon Tuliaupupu playing? Solomon Byrd, Eric's favorite guy, Devin Tompkins. I'd love to see where he is coming out of spring. And then you've got Jamil Muhammad they brought over from Georgia State. Where's he going to play? Is Eric Gentry, is he going to move up to the rush end? I know we've bantered about that here. A lot of talk, a lot of experimentation, I guess, is going to be going on during the spring.
All right. Well, Eric.
Jamil Muhammad's the guy. I think he's going to come in and he's going to grab that spot. He's another guy, again, Lincoln Riley talked about this offseason, that his pass rush ability kind of jumped off the tape. That's what they need there. They need a guy who's going to get after the quarterback. Alex Grinch's defenses do the best when they get a ton of production out of that spot. They need a guy. I liked what we saw, what we were able to see a little bit in the spring from Romello Height. I don't think you can take the first half of Rice and first series of Stanford and say that's who he is. I think he's better than what he showed there, not when he, not having to play through injury. So I don't want to just sort of dismiss him and say he's not in it. But I think Jamil Muhammad is coming in to be the starter at rush end, and we'll have that by the end of spring.
Chris, what's happening at this position?
I don't know, but Jamil Muhammad had 1 sack last year.
Right.
I mean, he had 6 sacks 2 years ago, which I think was what he was still learning defense. And I think you look at that and say, okay, this is an athletic guy. He got 6 sacks. He's probably on his way. Last year, he played 12 games, had a sack and a half and 8 quarterback hurries. I know he's a great athlete. I know the coaches have talked well about him, but that's not much better than Corey Foreman production. I mean, so.
Ouch.
Well, look, Corey Foreman has had 1 sack in 2 years. And I don't have a soft spot for him because I actually want somebody at that position who makes plays, because the defense is going to get torched until they find somebody. So it's not going to be him. I don't think it's going to be Jamil Muhammad. I think it's going to be Romello Height. I don't know what we have there, but he was the guy who sort of won the position last year. And, good sized guy, athletic. I think he's a starter. I think Solomon Byrd is going to get some time at that spot. And Bird's been productive at times. I don't think he's a fantastic athlete, but he's a guy who can get you 4 or 5 sacks this year. I think that's consistent with what he did last year. And then I think you have 2 younger guys who are going to push for playing time in Devin Tompkins and Braylon Shelby. I don't know what either one of those guys are going to bring to the table. It's hard to project. Sticking with Corey Foreman for a second, it's kind of hard to project sometimes what a high school kid is going to do at the next level. And so I don't know if Braylon Shelby's going to be an instant superstar or not, but it would not surprise me if Shelby starts to get real time by the end of the season. He's a really talented kid. But I think Romello Height is the guy until somebody else can take it from him. And you look at this group, there are a bunch of bodies, and there are a bunch of guys that you look at and say, yeah, he seems like he's got the size and the athleticism to do it, but you don't have a single one who's actually proven anything. So I don't know. I think that I think there's a real chance that by the time you get to September, that you're going to have somebody from the transfer portal that's going to take this spot over. That's my guess.
Could be. I think it depends how healthy Romello Height is. We kind of got a small sample size of him until he got hurt. But if he comes back ready to go, I think, Chris, you brought up a good point. I have Jamil Mohammed backing up height. I saw a film on Mohammed. I think he's really explosive. But you make an excellent point. They only had one sack. But I'll put him there because they didn't bring him in to sit. So he's a real athlete, no question about it. Depth-wise, kind of the same as you guys felt. I don't know. I started to wonder whether this is going to be Corey Foreman's last stand. I don't know how they're going to finesse with him. For his sake, I hope he comes off like gangbusters in the spring. But if he senses, and he will sense it by who plays when and what, and he doesn't, let's say, make a big statement like he's going to start, I just have a hard time thinking he's going to stay. I really do. And if that happens, that would be a real lesson to everybody about getting so overly excited about a 5-star, a #1 player in the country. I see Solomon Byrd being a specialist player. Devin Thompson, I think he's a real question mark, but in a good way. And I agree. I think that Braylon Shelby's got a lot of upside that we might see it in the second half of the season. But I think of all the positions, this one is probably the one for me that has the biggest question mark. So let's move to the Trojans inside linebackers unit. So Mark, again, to remind folks that are watching or listening on a podcast, again, we're only going to put in players that participate in spring ball, which is a little unfair to Eric Gentry, because I think, Mark, you brought it up. He could end up being a rush end. And that's going to be the disappointment, I think, of the spring for me, is where he could play if he was healthy and how that might affect other players. But Mark, who do you got there in the inside?
So because you just mentioned Gentry isn't going to be available to participate, I'm going to go Mason Cobb, Shane Lee. Behind them, I've got Rajon Davis, Jamil Mohammed, and then the depth is, we're going to start with Taka Curtis. I don't know where he's going to be by the end of spring. I'm going to feel really good with him sometime halfway through the season. But Taka Curtis, Eric Gentry, once he's healthy, we can figure out what's going on with him. Chris Thompson Jr., Carson Tabarachi, does he get a chance to show everybody why he transferred from Utah last year? He was a running back, I believe, out of high school, or when he got to Utah at least. So again, another athlete back there to play around with. And again, with Gentry not being available, these guys will get a chance to show the staff what they can do. I'm interested to see Mason Cobb with these other guys. Is Shane Lee going to be a starter by the time fall camp rolls around?
I think that's a great question. And Eric, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, just jumping into my sort of post-spring depth chart, I think Mason Cobb at middle linebacker, Taka Curtis right behind him, and then Shane Lee weak side backed up by Rajon Davis. That's kind of how I see the top four here. Again, Eric Gentry, I don't think is necessarily just going to lose his job if he's not available. He proved last year he can make plays. There's some things, like every defensive player for USC, where you got to show improvement and do things like that. But he's around the ball. He makes plays. He's a guy that I think you want to get on the field significantly this fall. Chris Thompson Jr., I'm interested in. He's kind of hit whenever he's been available, and the USC linebacker group could use some of that. Garrison Madden, I think, like with what we saw, just sort of physical development from Devin Tompkins, where you start thinking that guy looks like he could be something. Garrison Madden flashes a little bit of that as well. I'm excited to see him kind of year two. And then, yeah, Carson Tabarachi, it might take him a little bit to fully grasp that spot. But again, athletically and just in terms of being kind of an overall football player, he's a guy that you could see out on the field. So again, it's like defensive line. I think you feel much better about the depth here, especially because, again, Shane Lee is not an elite athlete playing linebacker, but confident, capable, has done it. Mason Cobb, same kind of thing. I think Mason Cobb maybe a little bit better in terms of running ability and coverage and that kind of stuff. So there are guys, there are sort of professional guys out there that have done it before and bring a lot of success kind of at that spot. So I think SC's in a pretty good spot there. And then Tackett Curtis is just all potential right now. And you wanted him to get there as quickly as possible. So I could see this being kind of a fire hose spring for him. Hey, get out there, give him as much as you can to get him as ready as quickly as possible this fall.
Chris, what are you looking at? Who's your two linebackers on the inside?
Well, Mason Cobb's taken one of those spots. I don't think there's any question about that. Come fall, Eric Gentry is going to be the other starter, which is strange because that means you're going to have a two-time captain who doesn't start on his football team. That's weird. I don't think I've ever seen that before. But Shane Lee is a productive player whose value comes probably more in the leadership he brings than it does in the plays he's going to make on the field. Although he can make plays, it's not like Shane Lee's a bad football player. He's not. Gentry, the disappointment with Gentry for me is not that we're not going to get to see him try rush in. I don't think he's going to be at rush in. The disappointment for me is Eric Gentry needed to add 20 pounds, and I don't know whether he's going to be able to do that with his ankle problem. And that's a problem because I think there are two guys on this defense who have superstar potential. We'll talk about another one in a minute, who need to put on about 15, 20 pounds. In Gentry's case, maybe more like 30 pounds. But Tackett Curtis is going to play a lot, and he's going to play a lot come the fall. I'm really high on this kid. I just don't know that you see this sort of athleticism and aggressiveness from a high school linebacker very often. He's going to get on the field. Rajon Davis has a large cheering section with the USC fan base. I would love to see him make plays and get on the field. I don't know what to make of him. You've had two different sets of coaches who seem to be underwhelmed. I don't know what to make of that, but it was one thing when before the new crew came in with Lincoln Riley, you could say, well, I don't know, he's sort of in their doghouse, but now he gets a second chance. He didn't get a second chance with Riley and Grinch either. That's a pretty big red flag for me, especially when you have a group that, especially when Gentry got hurt, wasn't making any plays. I mean, when Eric Gentry went out, the team is badly in need of somebody who can come in and play. And the coaches still didn't think Rajon Davis could do it. That's a giant red flag for me. I don't know what it is. Garrison Madden, as Eric mentioned, is a really interesting prospect. I mean, he wasn't that highly recruited coming out of high school, but this is a guy who ran what, a 10-700 meter. I mean, that's corner speed, good speed for a corner. And he's a big guy. Having Gentry and Tackett Curtis and Garrison Madden and Mason Cobb on the field gives USC a whole lot more speed and athleticism than they've seen there in a long, long time. So I think this group will be better this year. But the only sure thing I see right now in the spring is that Mason Cobb is going to lock down one of those spots and hold it throughout the fall.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Chris. I think Mason Cobb, you can just shoo him in. There's not much question in my mind that he'll be one of them. I will say that, again, I hate to belabor on the Eric Gentry position, but Eric Gentry is going to start one way or the other, no matter what his weight issue is. He's a difference maker when he's in there. So whether he starts at defense at the rush end or whether he's on the inside, remains to be seen, but he's going to be starting somewhere. But for our purposes, of course, we're trying to put people in positions at the end of spring ball and not where they're going to end up in the fall. That's for another discussion. I do think that Tackett Curtis is a rare athlete. Size, speed, academic excellence. It's everything is there. It's like Grudegood. And when you give a guy like that much of a chance, And the good news is since SC's first half of their schedule is not exactly brutal like the second half, Tackett could ease his way into it. I don't think it's going to be a problem much. I think any inexperience he shows, he'll make up for it quickly. I don't think he's going to make the same mistake twice. Again, I think the wild card here, just in getting playing time, is Rajon Davis. I happen to agree with Chris. It's a red flag, two different coaching staffs. But for Rajon to do what he did in the Cotton Bowl, it raised eyebrows. For those of you that are big supporters of Rajon, you had to be excited. Hopefully the kid is excited. He knows he's going to have a shot, probably a bigger shot, maybe because Gentry's not in there, but we'll see. We'll wish him the best of luck. But I could still see Shane Lee starting for the say. It's not really if it was a game situation. It's not who starts the game, it's who finishes the game. So just might work out better that Shane just starts, but I hope gets better in areas that have been deficient for him. And I think what I like about Lincoln Riley is when he says, don't put the coaching staff in a 50-50 position where we have to make the decision. We're not always right, which is a bit kudos to me or to him for making that comment. So we'll see how it's handled. So with that, let's go to halftime. College football panel is considering rule adjustments for the 2023 season. The 4 rule changes being considered are as follows. 1, outlawing consecutive timeouts. This rule would prevent one timeout from being called right after another, which is often done to try to ice place kickers. Rule 2, potentially not extending quarters. This rule could make it so that a first or third quarter would not be extended for an untimed down if the quarter ends on a defensive penalty. In that case, the down would be clocked in the next quarter. The third potential rule is the running clock. According to this rule, the clock will continue to run after an offense gains a first down, except inside 2 minutes and a half. This rule would prevent one timeout being called right after another, which often happens sometimes. But I think this is the kind of the NFL rule. And the fourth one, another running clock rule would be considered perhaps the most controversial. We'll have the clock continue to run after an incomplete pass once the ball has been spotted for play. I think this is the one that's the NFL. So looking at these 4 rule changes, potentially, your thoughts on the 4 rule changes. Which one do you think has the best chance of passing, Chris Arledge?
I have no idea which one has the best chance of passing. I have not polled the voters on this, but all of these rules seem designed to speed up the game. And what's strange about that is that I understand Major League Baseball has been doing things to speed up the game, but if you watch baseball on television, you can see why, because it is slow. I don't know that anybody's complaining that college football games are too long. I mean, maybe somebody is, but I haven't gotten I don't remember being in the middle of a fourth quarter of any decent college football game and saying, man, I wish this was over now. So I don't know. I mean, the one thing that all these rules will do, just keep in mind that if the shorter the game is, the more likelihood you have of an upset. Because as the game stretches out, you could imagine if you played an infinite number of quarters, you would almost never have an upset. The best and deepest team would almost always eventually win the game. The shorter the game, the more likely upsets are going to be. I don't know that makes a difference here because I don't have a sense of how many fewer plays you're likely to get in the average game. Does this mean that the average offense goes from 70 plays a game to 65 or 58? I have no idea if you passed all these. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying I can't possibly answer your question, Greg. I'm sorry. That I'm not sure that any of these rules are truly necessary, and that all these rules are going to do is make it slightly and very slightly more likely that we'll have more upsets. But upsets are one of the best parts of college football, so it's hard to complain about that.
Mark, are any of these things going to make a difference in a game if they're passed?
So we already know that coaches are terrible with clock management as it is, and now you're going to try and make it more challenging for them. If you want me to pick the rule that I'm fine with, is number 1. fine, sure. I mean, how often does that happen? If you think that's going to shorten the game, go for it. You get one timeout, you can't call another one 30 seconds later. I'm good with that. As far as the number 3, that running clock rule, tank it, throw it in the round file. I don't know why they want to be like the NFL. Or is it is that number 4?
Number 4, yeah.
Yeah, get rid of that one. I'm just not a fan of trying to mimic the NFL. That's what makes the college game so much better, in my opinion. And then as far as not extending quarters, who cares? Yeah, just roll it over and do it at the start of the next quarter. I don't think that's going to shorten the game. So as far as these rules, like I said, is just leave number 4 off the books, and I can deal with the other 3.
How about you, Eric? You want to leave 1 off the books, 3 off the books, all of them off the books?
I mean, like any recent rule change in almost every sport, these are all dumb. They're all dumb. They're all dumb. Chris, it does take too much time between the beginning of a game and the end of a game. The solution is not taking out football from that. The solution is playing the same amount of football in a shorter amount of time, and none of these do that, right? So that's the issue.
You mean cut commercials, McKinney?
I mean, find a way to do something like that. Put a commercial up as the game's going on. Go picture in picture with it. Do whatever. Rent out the field as a green screen and run commercials on the turf as the game's going on. Figure something out on that. The timeouts, no timeouts back to back to ice place kickers. You give a team 3 timeouts in a half. They can take them whenever they want. If they want to take them 3 in a row, take them 3 in a row. They're not getting 7 of them when they take them, and they don't replenish. That's it. They can take 3, take 3. Having the clock run after certain things where you have ingrained and embedded in your game, this is when the clock stops. This is how we operate in all of these situations. You can't do that. You can't all of a sudden say, okay, no, none of that's true anymore. You got to rethink all of this stuff. It's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, you're going to have so many issues. Again, we don't replay the down if there's a defensive penalty at the first quarter or third quarter. That happens 3 times in a year throughout college football. I mean, you're trying to find problems where there aren't problems, and you're eventually going to play whatever it is, 15 fewer plays a game, 20 fewer plays a game. And if you want to shrink the amount of football, just play 3 quarters then. Just cut a whole quarter out and end at the end of the 3 quarters. That'll cut things down significantly. All of the rule changes, the baseball stuff too, all of that stuff is just kind of like, you're just doing stuff because you feel like it every offseason, and it always comes across as just kind of lunacy for it, because no one is going to go, man, I really hate college football, but if that game is 12 minutes shorter, I'm going to watch it, and I'm going to start going, and I'm going to be a diehard fan. Nobody's watching baseball this year because all of a sudden there's a pitch clock. Like, oh, that makes me excited about baseball. I'm going to be a baseball fan. The timing and all that stuff is crazy when you're changing how the game functions and how you go in and play the game.
You want to shorten the game, fix the officiating, and fix instant replay, and that will shorten the game.
That's it, right? Take your commercial breaks during replay. You've been okay building in an extra 15, 20 minutes over the course of a game, a lot of these games, for officials to look at what you're looking at for 20 minutes, and then typically come up with an answer that no sane person could come up with. I mean, that's you can start there.
Hey, if you polled the Pac-12 officials on what the existing clock management rules are before these rule changes, would they know? Like, if you change these rules and you told the Pac-12 officials, here's the new rule, when they say, I didn't even realize the old rule, because my impression is they might not.
Forget calling back-to-back timeouts to ice kickers. USC got a timeout during a play at Utah. Right? I mean, you can take any number of timeouts whenever you want in the Pac-12. So I don't know how they're going to do this.
And you can start running the clock no matter when you want to. Also, it's pretty remarkable.
And you know what? The irony of this.
What's that?
I was gonna say, the irony of this whole timeout thing is, if Pete Carroll would not have taken that extra timeout against Stanford, he would not have lost that game when Mosaic McCurtis got switched to the other side of the field, but Pete Carroll thought he was being smart.
Yeah, well, there's some other things he could have done differently in that game too, but look, I'm not sure that I want Lincoln Riley to have to figure out the new clock management rules, because let's be honest, as much as I love Lincoln, he struggled with clock management last year. I'm not sure I want to add to the complexity for him.
Thank you.
Well, I tell you, to me, the actual game is fine. Okay. College is so good that even the pros have kind of fed off of the college game, going way back to where they put the goalposts, when they used to actually have the goalposts for the most ridiculous reason in the middle of the end zone. And then the pros, they pick up the 2-point conversion, right? But I think if they really want to shorten the game, shorten the commercials. Okay. That is unbelievably long. Maybe what they need is a halftime just built on commercials. Forget about the halftime analysis for any length. Just go one commercial after another, because nobody pays attention to the commercials unless they're the Super Bowl commercials. And I tell you, the one that frosts me, I wish they'd had a rule that says you can't call a commercial after a kickoff. You know, you get a commercial after a score, then they come back for the kickoff, and then they go to another commercial. That just, to me, that ruins it, the flow of the game. So I don't see any of these rules amounting to anything. It's just like they're trying to reinvent the wheel. So with that, let's move on. Second half, we kick off with continuing our look at the spring defense by position groups. Let's examine the cornerback's position, and again, give us your post-game depth chart panel and your overall justification for the rankings. Let's start off with the WeAreSC editor-in-chief, Erik McKinney. Who's going to be the corners at the end of spring?
This is actually a tougher one than I thought kind of going into it. I've got three guys that I want to say. I can't see Christian Roland Wallace coming over and not being a starter by the end of spring. What the buzz you kind of hear about Damani Jackson and Jacoby Covington, two guys who flew under the radar a little bit last year, whether it was injury or just kind of not making the quick impact that you thought they would. Starting to hear, hey, they're right in there. They've kind of figured things out and they'll be there. So I think those three guys are really the guys to watch. I'll say Roland Wallace and Covington actually as potentially there. But if Damani Jackson puts it together and he's healthy and going, that guy's going to be on the field. He's going to play. And so you've got a guy, what Mekhi Blackman did last year, you're hoping that Christian Roland Wallace can do this year. I think Mekhi Blackman's a better athlete, better in coverage, all of that than Christian Roland Wallace. He's more physical and more built a little bit. But Damani and Jacoby Covington, I think are better overall athletes. Christian Roland Wallace has a ton of experience. And so that potentially is I think what gets him that veteran leadership and all that stuff that he brings in. I think gets him that. I want to see Josh Jackson Jr. healthy and on the field again. The flashes he showed really quickly at corner, it feels like forever ago now that he moved over from wide receiver and played corner. He's a guy that I would love to see healthy and going again, because I think he has the talent to play corner and play it really well.
All right. Well, I always enjoy this particular part because I know Chris is a defensive back, so he's going to have a special take on it. So, Chris, who's your starters and why, and your backups?
I don't have a special take. My take is almost exactly the same as Eric's was. Christian Roland Wallace is probably going to start at one of these spots, and he does have a ton of experience. He came over to be a starter. I don't think the coaches bring him over if they don't expect him to play a lot. I also agree. Damani Jackson is going to be a starter if he's healthy. You don't get that combination of athletic skills very often. And when I say you don't, I'm not just talking about in college football, I'm talking about in the NFL. You don't get guys who have that size with those arms who run 10, 200 meters. You just don't get that. So if he's healthy, he'll play. I mean, that leaves three other, Sierra Wright, Jacob Covington, and Josh Jackson, all of whom can play. And I suspect one of those guys is probably going to move over to nickel. We'll talk about that in a bit. But I think one of those guys is going to get on the field somewhere else, maybe Covington. So I think those are the two starters, and those are the three guys pushing for time behind them.
Mark, who's your CBs?
I'm glad Chris segued into that. One of these guys might move to nickel, because I agree. I'm not sure it's going to be Jacoby Covington though. My starters, I'm going to go with Christian Roland Wallace. Again, too much experience to come over from Arizona. You need somebody who is going to stick his nose in there and tackle. He's that guy. Opposite him, it's going to be Damani Jackson. If he was scheduled to start last year before the injuries started to creep up, if he's healthy now, I don't see why that wouldn't carry over into 2023. Behind him, you've got Jacoby Covington and Sierra Wright. Interesting, Sierra Wright, at least, I'm not sure where he is on that depth chart, because Joshua Jackson Jr., again, is a very good athlete. And if he's healthy, is Sierra going to be able to fight these guys off? Because these guys he's competing against, they're bigger. And I'm not talking lengthwise, I'm talking, physically. And I don't know if Sierra has the ability to get thicker. Maybe he does. The interesting guy I wanted to keep an eye on here is Maliki Crawford. You cannot teach 6'4", and if he's got that same type of twitch that Damani Jackson has, that's someone just to kind of keep an eye on. The guy who I think is going to move to nickel, if all these other guys can step up, meaning Jacoby Covington and Sierra Wright and Joshua Jackson, I'd like to see Damani at that nickel spot. But we'll talk about that more.
Well, I think if Damani Jackson is healthy, and based on what we know, I think he starts. I also think Christian Roland Wallace starts for the obvious reasons that you guys have already talked about. My scrutiny is on Sierra Wright, on just how consistently inconsistent he could be, how good he could be, and how average he could be. And I know that a lot of his life is filtered towards theater arts, and that has been questioned. I think a good question by maybe members of the coaching staff at some point in time. I think Jacoby Covington is kind of a wild card for me, that he could end up starting. Josh Jackson Jr.'s depth to me, anytime a guy changes positions. And I want to say, there are players that even during the John McKay era changed positions and were better off for it, like Josh Jackson Jr. Has done. And we see that with other teams that SC's had that have had big success. So that's kind of how I see it. Let's move on to the safety position. Erik, who's your starters at the safeties?
So Kalen Bullock's a starter, and he's locked in. The Alex Grinch really liked Bryson Shaw. It was something where you could kind of tell the way he talked about him, and Bryson Shaw came in and absolutely made some plays. He played better than what I thought he would deliver for USC when he came in there. It wouldn't surprise me if those end up being the two guys. I'm very curious, and I know we're going to get into nickel next. That's such a huge wild card for me, that nickel spot, based on what happens. Does Max Williams, he was the nickel, but he started the year playing one of those two deep safety spots. Does he go back there and get in that mix? Zion Branch is a guy where I think he could play a lot of different spots. He's big enough to play right up at the line of scrimmage and maybe play linebacker for you based on kind of what you want to do formationally and move stuff around. But he's also a guy that I think has to be in the mix at one of those two safety spots, and potentially rotating guys a lot more than what you did last year. But I think kind of off the top, Kalen and Bryson to end spring. And then, yeah, Zion is my wild card, because I'm not going to kind of hold him back from anything. I think that guy is physical, is talented, can hit, can cover, can do everything that you want at safety.
Chris, who's your safeties at the end of spring?
Yeah, Caleb Bullock is obviously one, and he's the other guy that I was talking about that just needs to add weight. Look, it'll be interesting to see whether Gentry and Bullock come in much larger next year, because they both need to. And if they don't, that will raise some questions for me. I mean, if you really need to put on 15 pounds in order to be your best self in a year that should be Bullock's last year in college football, and you don't do it, that's a problem. So I suspect we'll see a bigger, stronger Kalen Bullock, and we need to, because he's a fantastic cover guy and a great athlete who will sometimes put his nose in there and smack somebody, but his tackling has to get better. And I think being a little bit thicker would help. Because we need tacklers back there, I think Bryson Shaw and Zion Branch are probably the two guys for me also. Shaw probably starts with a leg up because Branch is younger and was hurt all last year. But Branch is a big kid and a great athlete. So it wouldn't surprise me if the two of them end up sort of platooning at that spot. After that, I don't know, other than to say that at some point Christian Pierce is going to make a run at one of those spots if these other guys don't play better than they played last year. But that's not going to happen this early. It may happen by November or so. We'll see. So I'm going to go Kalen Bullock. I'm going to go Zion Branch, but I think Bryson Shaw is sort of a co-starter at that other spot.
Mark, you agree?
I for the most part, yeah. I disagree with Chris though, with Christian Pierce. I don't think we're gonna have to wait till November. He's a special player. I was talking with Scott recently, and he was talking with his high school coach, and they were talking about how Christian Pierce is literally a player that when you put him on the field, he makes things happen. He changes the way things are done. So I don't think we're going to wait till November. I think he's a special player. That's the only thing I disagree with what Chris said though there with the safeties. As far as my starter, yeah, Kalen Bullock, he's going to be the starter, playing deep. I think Bryson Shaw is going to be the guy starting up front. And then the real trick is who is going to back up Kalen, because when he came out, I just remember seeing the back of USC jerseys a lot, chasing receivers. So right now I've got Anthony Beavers backing up. Zion Branch is going to be backing up near the line of scrimmage, and how long you keep him as a backup, I don't know, but yeah, you got a lot of depth there. You've got what we didn't mention, Zamarian Gordon. He's another big guy. I'm not sure if you could even consider putting him up at linebacker, but he's a bigger guy. So there you go. Alex Grinch, that's his position group to coach. And if he doesn't get out of them what he needs to, I don't know what to say. You got the talent, that's for sure.
All right, I'll say my starters are going to be at the end of spring, Kalen Bullock and Bryson Shaw. I think the backups, Max Williams, who I don't really consider a backup at all. And I think the wild card for this position, and maybe nickel in some ways, would be Zion Branch. He's almost, I think for the common fan, probably is not as focused on Zion Branch. I think we are, because we know if he's healthy and he's ready to go, he can make a huge impact. As far as Kalen Bullock, I'd like to see him be a bigger hitter than he is without losing his ability to stop plays. Bryson Shaw, to me, is a solid player, and you need solid players. But if he got beat out by Zion Branch sometime in the middle of the season, it wouldn't shock me at all. Which takes us to the nickel position. Erik, who's your starter?
So just discussing the nickel position in general, the nickel and the rush end are the two spots where I would put maybe a weight line at like 210 or something and just split every defensive player into two groups and just work them at, if you're bigger than that, you work at rush end. If you're smaller than that, you work at nickel. Those are the two spots that I think you need to find the guy. You need to find the guy at that spot. I think nickel, if Max Williams moves back there, he obviously has the most experience there. He didn't have, I think he would tell you too, he did not have the best year. You also look at the guys he's covering, and again, the guys who are going to line up against that spot this coming year, those tight ends that USC plays, they are phenomenal. So for USC nickel to struggle against some of those guys, it's not completely unexpected, but that spot's got to win more one-on-one 50-50 balls than it did last year. I think Max Williams is a guy there that can step his game up. Latrell McCutcheon is a guy that played a lot there. Jalen Smith. I'm really interested to see Fabian Ross maybe get a shot there. Again, one of those guys you didn't expect him to play as a true freshman last year. Where's his development right there? And then again, like I mentioned, I would love in the spring to see a ton of guys get a shot there. If it's Prophet Brown moving, we mentioned Damani Jackson. If Jacoby Covington goes inside, if Zion Branch gets a look there, like Zamarian Gordon, a guy like that, you have to find an answer there, because I think you want to be sort of multiple with that against the run, against the pass. If you bring him on a blitz, I mean, that's a spot where Damani Jackson, you let him take a few steps inside, and now he's coming at the quarterback from a little bit closer. He's a guy that can help you in the run game too. I think you need to be more dynamic, more physical, and win more battles at that spot. So I see that as being a pretty key spot for this defense. Again, that in Russia, and I would let everybody take a shot there and see who your real best guys are at those two spots.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think Max Williams has the leg up to start here because for two reasons. One is he's at this point extremely experienced. He's played a lot of football. And he's played productively, right? This is a guy who's made a lot of big plays for USC. He did not play particularly well last year. And I think the second half of the year, the defense fell apart, and Max Williams was a big part of that. But he's a guy who's made a lot of big plays in the past. I think that he can come in. He's not going to give you a big body, right? He's not like having an extra linebacker in the game. He's more like my size. And so that limits you a little bit in terms of what you do at the position. But I think he starts there. You have Jalen Smith, who's played a fair amount. I don't know that, I think like much of the secondary, he's played a fair amount. I don't know that he's stood out as playing well very much of that time. Latrell McCutcheon, I think, is in the same boat. Look, there's a guy who comes over with the other staff. They clearly think he can play, right? They had seen him in games, they had seen him in practice, they had seen him in the weight room, and they want him part of their program. That tells me that at some point they expect him to be on the field. Is that this year? I mean, maybe it's this year, maybe it's the nickel spot. And I do think that there's a decent chance that one of those corners, I'm projecting Covington, but I may be wrong about that. I could see Damani Jackson doing it. He is Jackson is a bigger guy, and he seems to be pretty physical. He could play that spot. He's certainly a guy who has the height and the wingspan to deal with big tight ends. He is, but he also is a former five-star recruit who probably sees himself as a number one corner in the NFL at some point, which means that he's probably not going to be real excited about being moved over to nickel. So my guess is he's going to insist on playing outside, and then he probably gets his way. So I'm going Max Williams, but this again, with the exception of Kalen Bullock, who who I think is a very, very good proven player who needs to tackle better, but you know what you're going to get from him, and it's pretty good. With the exception of Caleb Bullock, I don't know that you have a ton of talent in the secondary, and none of those guys have consistently played well. The secondary has been an absolute disaster for the last 2 years. I mean, shockingly bad, most of those games. So I don't know what to make of that. Somebody's going to have to step up and play football, I hope. I guess nobody has to. We could, we can continue to try to win games 45-42, but it would be nice if somebody steps up. I don't know who it's going to be. That was long. Max Williams is my starter.
I bet Marc Kulkin knows who's going to step up. Who is it going to be, Mark?
Well, I'm just a little upset I had to wait this long to back up what Erik said. And then, Chris
What's that? Shot at me?
No. See, you stepped in before you let me finish. And then you handed it off to me perfectly with where I was going to go. Hopefully I didn't lose my train of thought now. So what Erik said about these guys need to get bigger at that position. So isn't this Alex Grinch's fault? I mean, he's the guy who's putting undersized guys at that nickel spot. Max Williams is by no means big. Latrell McCutcheon is by no means big. Jalen Smith, he played at the beginning of the year. I don't remember him being on the field at the end of the year. And then, Fabian Ross, again, not a big guy. So is it the Jimmies and the Joes, or is it the X's and O's when it comes to his scheme? I don't know. If we're going to put these guys at the nickel spot and you're going to have the Daltons of the world from Utah running crossing patterns, none of these guys are going to bring them down.
Well, let's just remember that Keithy's coming back for Utah. So
Well,
we'll get a big look at that, I'm sure.
An NFL tight end. He's not your Dalton Kincaid, 6'4", 250, 60-pound guy. So that's where I'm at with it. That's where I'm thinking, bring over a Damani Jackson to play that nickel spot, a Zion Branch. Take your bigger cornerbacks. And what you were talking about, Chris, saying, well, Damani might not want to make that move. NFL GMs and so forth say, hey, you know what? If you can play both, that's a plus. So there's nothing wrong. They do a lot of cross training in spring. So because that's what, we're talking about who's going to be the starters and the backups out of spring. If this is who I get to choose from, how they have them listed, Max Williams is going to be the starter. And I don't know, maybe Latrell McCutcheon got bigger and he's going to be the backup. After that, their depth. I want to see some of the other guys move over there because we're talking about tackling, to what Erik brought up at the very beginning. Got to get bigger at that position.
All right, I'm going to go with Max Williams as the starter because it's a post-spring depth chart. However, in quotation marks, I think that Zion Branch should get a shot at it as a potential backup, along with Latrell McCutcheon, of course. But, when you start talking about, as Mark brought up, the matchups against big tight ends, and SC is going to face a number of them. And Zion Branch is not a little guy. He would measure up physically with a lot of these guys. It's whether he athletically can fit that mode. Perhaps he can. I would hope he could. But for the moment, I'll go with Max Williams, but I don't think it's in stone, except for a post spring depth chart. All right, let's go to overtime. Viewer questions, panel answers. Panel, it's halftime. It's time to answer some viewer questions. I should say overtime. Question 1 from Troy76. Any thoughts on using Tackett Curtis on offense at some point due to his versatility? Maybe as a lead blocker near the goal line. Has similar size and aggressiveness as Ricky Bell, the late USC big-time fullback converted to tailback. What do you think? It's a free-for-all here. Jump in. Would you use Tackett Curtis on offense at some point due to his versatility?
No.
Why?
USC has struggled at linebacker since, I don't know, 2008. And now you have a guy who's a spectacular prospect, but hasn't played a ton of linebacker, right? Because in high school, he was playing as much safety as anything else. I want Tackett Curtis learning how to play linebacker. I want him to become a superstar linebacker. I do not want to turn him into a fullback. The offense is going to score plenty of points without Tackett Curtis playing fullback on the goal line. All we have to do on the goal line is let the Heisman Trophy winner play his option. Shoot, I'm losing my mind, guys. I'm sorry this happened. I shouldn't drink before I come on this show. I mean, fake it to the running back and let him run around and do whatever he wants. USC will score. So no, I think it's a bad idea.
Tackett Curtis is absolutely going to play on offense. His one offensive snap is going to come as a fullback where he fakes a block, rolls out, and catches a touchdown to cap off a blowout win over LSU in the 2024 opener to stick it to the home team. The hometown team, LSU, coming out and watching Tackett Curtis score a touchdown against them. No, let's let this guy play linebacker. Let's let him turn into a linebacker.
I don't know when you wrote that down, Eric. Just now, or did you have that in your back pocket since whenever?
No, I'm just looking at this
since signing day.
Well, I think that Tackett Curtis could very well play on offense on specific specialty plays. Teams do that all the time now. There's players that who was it? Was it Utah that had Jack? What's his name? And he played linebacker.
Oregon State.
Oregon State
Had that kid. Yeah.
Yeah. I could see Tackett Curtis being used that way. I mean, if you saw the obvious, not so obvious last week and had a chance to see video of Tackett Curtis on offense, he is a freaking stud.
The question isn't whether he can play offense. He can. If you have an offense that's going to score 45 points a game, and USC does, do you take the best linebacker prospect you've had in many years and have him screwing around, learning how to run an out route on the goal line? Why? Just play the kid at linebacker, Greg. What are you doing? What are you doing? You're trying to ruin the team.
Chris, you're not allowed to cheer when Tackett catches that touchdown against LSU next year.
You're complaining the entire time.
Eric's get a beer in the press box. He's gonna know exactly.
As brilliant as you are, Chris, no one would deny that. But the question was, at some point, it could be for one play, it could be for two plays. I'm not ruling out that he would play. Now, I agree with what you're saying in terms of will he really do it? It will not shock me if he gets in there at some point. He's just too valuable. Yes, he's valuable as a linebacker, but for one or two plays, I don't think there's a problem with it. All right, let's go to question number 2 from Big Trojan. This is a good one. Who's been your favorite out-of-conference opponent to play USC football that's not named Notre Dame? Who is it?
Ohio State, Nebraska.
Ohio State.
OU.
All good answers.
I gotta say it doesn't compare at all, but I do like that USC schedules the in-state teams, right? Like when Fresno State comes down or they play San Jose State, I like keeping a game like that on the schedule. It doesn't compare at all to a Penn State and Ohio State, although these are, I guess we got to restart. These are not out of conference games anymore. Now I'm going to say Washington, Oregon, those are fun out of conference games.
So that's one vote for San Jose State by McKinney. Good vote.
Fresno State was first.
Well, I have to say, I have nothing but great respect for Erik McKinney. I can do without Fresno State. I can do without San Jose State. And the interesting part is because USC is going into the Big Ten, it's possible that all these, other than Oklahoma, they may all be in the Big Ten at some point, Notre Dame included. I think it depends on the era. I think during the late 70s, early 80s, Oklahoma was it. Oklahoma made a brief return when we played them in the national championship game.
And in 88.
Yeah, and Nebraska was right there at one point when they had home and home series with them. So it's kind of like the era for me. So as I look at it right now, I'm not quite sure who is my favorite out of conference, but maybe when SC plays LSU, that will rekindle a little bit for the moment in Las Vegas, a favorite opponent. Question 3 from SC, the one panel, what are your top 3 head-to-head matchups for SC this season, which will determine SC finishes in the college football playoff top 4, assume SC wins the Pac-12 championship. Comments?
The 3 teams that finished with the highest rankings, other than USC. No, I mean, right, Notre Dame's always big. And then I'll say Oregon and Washington, although UCLA maybe in there as well, but I think probably a safe bet that if it comes down to it, Notre Dame, Oregon, Washington games are going to be the top 3.
Ditto. I agree with Eric. I think it's going to be Washington, Oregon, and at Notre Dame. Interesting enough.
I forgot about Utah already, I guess.
Well, I think what's interesting, you got.
When's the last time they beat us?
Wow, fresh meat.
No, listen, here's the thing. The 2 toughest games are Oregon and Notre Dame because those are both road games against very good opponents. But the reality is USC can afford to lose one of those 2 and still make the college football playoff, right? You can make the play if you win the conference and have 1 loss, especially against USC's schedule this year, you're in. So they need to win one of those 2, and then they have to beat, UCLA, Washington, Utah all at home. And of those 3, I mean, I would say that Washington, Utah are probably the better teams, but I don't know. I think UCLA is going to be pretty good again. So, I mean, that last half of the schedule this year is just horrific. I mean, that is a brutal slog. The first half is going to be easy. USC is going to be sitting about number 2 or 3. They're going to be undefeated. They're going to be outscoring people by 40 points. And then all of a sudden they're going to have a war every single week.
Well, I was going to say, Chris, before you rudely interrupted me.
I'll do it again, Greg. Don't talk.
Well, I would hope that you would, because consistency is what I look for in my panelists. When we talk about the top 3 head-to-head matchups, Chris is absolutely correct. Having the road games with Notre Dame and Oregon are going to be really could tell the season as far as getting into the playoffs, and that's going to be a tough one. Washington, I totally respect that Washington's going to give all SC can handle, but it will be in the Coliseum, which is a big difference for those of you that have gone to Seattle to watch the Trojans, the Husky. That is a tough place to play. Timely question here from Hector in Southgate. What's the first thing you'll be looking for at the first day of spring practice, which again starts this Saturday? I'll go with this. I'll say the first thing I want to see is who's there and who's missing, and if they're missing, why. Jump in, guys. That's my thought.
Yeah, that's certainly always the first thing. Where guys are lined up and who's there and not there.
That's all you
I'm
can.
curious to, go ahead, Mark.
No, that's all you can really take from the first spring camp, for first practice of spring camp. Who's showing up? Who's got their helmet and their shorts and shells on? Because that's all you're getting.
I want to see who warms up and stretches the best.
Right.
That's what I want to see. If you tell me that Jalen Smith looks really solid in the warm-ups and stretching, I'm going to pencil him in as my nickel starter.
No question.
The veterans are going to have a huge advantage, right? Knowing where to stand, timing of everything, all that. They're going to look great compared to the new guys.
I want to see if we're going to institute a haka this year, because if they come out and they do that in their warm-ups, that will tell us something interesting. And I think we should to help recruit the Polynesian guys, because if you're going to recruit offensive and defensive linemen in the West, you need to land Polynesian guys. I think we start doing the haka. I think it starts this Saturday.
Well, I think Coach Nua should take that responsibility, and they should be part of warm-ups, in my opinion. They should start before they start stretching. Just get right into it and make sure your tongue is ready to wag. Question 5 from Janice in Highland Park. This is a big one now. Does Caleb Williams have a girlfriend?
What is this? People Magazine? Is this Entertainment Tonight?
Well, we're trying to be a little bit of, touch all the bases here.
Who's we? I'm not trying to do that at all.
Well,
I've seen him at a basketball game with someone of the opposite sex. Let's just leave it there.
Okay, so Kulkin has the dirt.
of course, Kulkin has. Does Kulkin? I'd be disappointed if he didn't
I
have.
didn't say it was his girlfriend. I said I've seen him about town, and he's been out with someone of the opposite persuasion.
Is it always the same? Is it always the same girl though?
I'm not going to kiss and tell. I don't know.
Okay, I mean, I hope you don't. Kiss
I don't
anybody
know. I haven't
before.
taken that deep of a look. The
Okay.
last
I thought that she wasn't he supposed to be going with some movie star, blonde movie star? Did I get that wrong? Was that erroneous
Eric,
report?
was that in the People magazine interview?
Are we spending more time talking about this than the nickel spot? What is happening right now?
I lodged an objection at the very beginning, Eric, but Greg insisted. He really
I zoned out, came back, and it's still this same question.
All right, let's finish it up with the final question from Doug and Irvine. Do you know the time for the spring game on April 15th? Does anybody know?
Noon.
It is noon?
Noon.
You're willing to bet your life and reputation that it is noon. Correct.
I can read an email. Yeah, noon, 12 p.m. Spring game, April 15th.
All right. Well, Chris, are you going to be in the country for that?
I think so. I should be.
Chris,
I don't know if I'll be there. If it's going to be televised, I may just stay in Dallas and watch it on TV again.
well, there you go.
Email did come, Eric. I see why you're so confident with your response.
Yeah, nothing about TV yet, but that's going to be the time that fans can come out and see them. It's not going to be during the practices. So, yeah, pen that in, circle it, April 15th, noon, spring game.
Oh, there you have it.
Change.
And WeAreSC exclusive.
And also the first day of camp is not Saturday the 4th. It is Sunday the 5th.
Is that right?
Players will report on the 4th.
Oh, yeah, when we get to show up is on the
I
Sunday.
assume so.
Oh, and we get to show up. Okay, well, that's a horse of a different color. All right, a reminder again, if you have a question or comments for our panel, go to either of the WeAreSC message boards. Click on the thread that pertains to Inside the Trojans Huddle viewer or listener questions. That does it for us for Tuesday's edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle. So until next Tuesday, a big thank you to our excellent panelists, Marc Kulkin, Erik McKinney, Chris Arledge, and a special thank you to all of you for your watching or listening to Inside the Trojans Huddle. Have yourself a great week. This is your moderator, Greg Katz, saying, fight on, everybody.